All right, everybody. Hello. It's Sunday, July the 7th. You may notice there has been a change. Um, Namely, that I have two bookshelves behind me now instead of just one. This was something that had been on my mind for a while to essentially put my books all together in one area and make that the background, because before I had this dresser drawer set with a secondhand stereo that I got for cheap, and really there's no reason to have that in the shot. And I don't know. I mean, the thing is, now I'm showing off twice as much as my book collection, and I have to admit, I don't know. I may be giving off the impression of somebody who's read a lot of books, but you know, don't worry about it. Like some of these books I may not have actually read yet. I'll leave it up to you to guess which of these I have read and which I haven't. I don't want to come off as being more literate than I really am. But it was in response because there are certain archetypal patterns going on, where specifically what I tend to focus, what I'm going to be focusing on today, is the fact that we're going to be having a Mars-Uranus conjunction. And at the point of making this video, though, the planet Venus, which rules Taurus, where the Mars-Uranus conjunction is happening, is in a sextile, giving a sextile aspect with reception. And as you know, sextiles are of the nature of Venus, and when a planet has reception, it's hosting this Mars-Uranus conjunction in its own sign. This is generally something which makes it better, I would say. This for all. Now, I just want to reassure people that, Mars is a malefic. Mars doesn't do very well in Taurus because it's the opposite sign. And I often, with astrology, I get a little bit of a I've been doing astrology since 2017, and I kind of have this thing where over the years, whenever there's a Mars-Uranus conjunction or Mars-Uranus card aspects, I'm always anticipating trouble, but it turns out not to be quite as bad. However, there is a certain energy around this which can be kind of like rebellious, or perhaps violent, or acting from a spirit of like frustration, that kind of thing. And there is also, if you think about Taurus as being an Earth sign, being fixed Earth, there is, what I found interesting anyways, is that on the day that I decided to rearrange this bookshelf situation, that was in the morning, and later on that day, like I saw on the news that there were earthquakes in Vancouver Island, which is far enough from where I live that it's not really local. Like, I'm not in the epicenter of the earthquake, but it's close enough that it's in the neighborhood. And so I'm not suggesting a causal reaction where, I decide to move some furniture around and it triggers an earthquake. It could even be the other way around. It could be that me being kind of intuitive and sensitive felt these kinds of geomagnetic shifts, and somehow that translates into my rational mind as like, now is the time to move some furniture around, right? But there is a underlying Mars-Uranus dynamic of feeling like you have the energy to actually put a bit of elbow grease into it, to put some muscle into it, or to move some physical things around. And there's something about how I'm kind of joking with it a little bit, because it's sort of like there may be this sort of like underlying pretense that, astrology is all about like transformation and evolution and, radical. There's time for a kind of like a radical life shift, right? It's time, there's a kind of sense of mounting frustration, or a sense of mounting impatience, and there's this need to like put the wheels of change in motion, take the bull by the horns and radically transform my life. And in this kind of dynamic, the idea that just moving a little bit of furniture around may be a kind of a paltry or insignificant. But the thing is, though, I think that I have been considering the idea that, like, if you think about Mars being about, like, there could be a kind of like you look at it in other contexts right now. We had a bunch of elections in France. There's a bunch of there apparently the far right are coming to power in France, and there's a bunch of protests against this, which the far right are using to further justify themselves that they need power to squash these rebellious protesters or something, right? But there's some kind of like that kind of Mars-Uranus kind of rioting, rebelling, take control of me kind of energy that is like is frustrated with the way things are, wants some kind of change. And there's this kind of like issue here because, well, for one thing, it's not this Mars-Uranus dynamic. Mars will be perfecting this conjunction with Uranus on the 15th of June. I mean, sorry, the 15th of July. So that's only about a week away. So we've got a week of buildup into the intensification of this Mars-Uranus dynamic. And then by the time we get to July, when we get to July 21st, Mars will be ingressed into Gemini. So give it another week after that, and the Mars-Uranus dynamic will have been completely cooled off. And then we have Mars in Gemini with Jupiter, a totally different situation, right? And there is the idea of like the protests and the activism, or trying basically like acting out this archetypal dynamic, right? And at the same time, we can look at it in terms of things like, we could talk about like mental health triggers, stuff like that. Things that could be like emotional triggers. And there's something that I have been considering in that often people may get in trouble because they are, instead of being restrained or keeping their cool and composure, they're basically like acting something out, right? Like it feels too much to hold their emotion in, so they need to express it either through political demonstration or, maybe recording silly videos on the internet or, speaking their mind, freedom of whatever, but there's a need to express or something, right? And I think there's some kind of like unrefined acting out of energy that can get people in trouble or cause problems. And there are things that, even if it's just rearranging some bookshelves, rearranging some furniture, that in a way that seems like it's, maybe getting not contacting the external situation, not having any meaningful change on the externals, there's still some sort of dynamic where everything's connected, where you think you're just isolated in your little bedroom and you're moving bookshelves around, but for some reason the day you do that, there's earthquakes, or the day you do that, there's protests, or there's some kind of thing where in the most insignificant little things that you do in your own little life may somehow be interconnected with this whole. But you also don't want to get paranoid that if you do the wrong thing, you're going to create all sorts of problems. But we are in the situation where, like, if I'm just recording an astrology video, like if I'm recording a video, I have to be careful about what I'm saying, because it could be that if I just say one little thing that's wrong, it may have some sort of like domino effect consequence that I wasn't considering, right? But nonetheless, I thought I would, the first video I've recorded now with having a new double bookshelf background, that there is some kind of underlying Mars Mars-Uranus and Taurus dynamic with Venus, its host, in that sextile, creating a like what seems maybe insignificant may actually be creating something. You could act out these dynamics in a way that's actually more harmonious. That makes for maybe this is a more it could be a little bit. All the books, it could be a bit maximalist, maybe perhaps, but it sort of like consolidates. It sort of organizes things where I'm taking things out of the frame that didn't really need to belong there in the first place, and sort of reorganizing. There's other certain things going on here as well, where Venus is in Cancer right now, making this sextile to Mars and Uranus. Venus in Cancer is also making a trine to Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, which I was just going over the Neptune retrograde in my last video. So there's some kind of like, when Venus and Neptune are together, there's kind of that like, either like a spa date or some kind of like, maybe catching up on things like Game of Thrones, fantasy, or I finally got around to watching the part 2 of Dune, which I had been putting off. And what's going to happen is that pretty soon, right before the Mars-Uranus conjunction, Venus is going to tip over into Leo and then make that opposition to Pluto. So at the peak of this, like we're in this moment right now leading up to it where it's kind of a little bit more harmonious, but it may get kind of intense once we get there, because Venus will be opposing Pluto, and then eventually the Sun, like all the planets, once they cross this Cancer into Leo point, they're going to make this Pluto opposition. And but before that, we've got this space where there's something. I was also thinking, like, I often talk about my own living situation and some of my own personal frustrations and stuff like that, but I don't think that it's appropriate for me to lay out all the nitty gritty details of whatever my finances or my living and all this kind of stuff. But I do live with my family, and you may notice. I mean, I decided to omit having this book on my shelf in case it either, I don't know, maybe it would mess up the algorithm or people would be upset by it. But the thing, I've got this book here called A Day in the Life of the Soviet Union. And so this is a classic picture book back when Russia was the Soviet Union. And basically my family, what's interesting is that I mentioned before I did a DNA test. And what's interesting about my DNA test is that I am kind of, this could do with Pluto, right? With there's certain manipulation or coercion or something. But I feel like the results of my DNA test may have been manipulated to obscure my Russian heritage, because my mother has always sort of identified as not just Ukrainian, but Russian Ukrainian. And I think she did a DNA test, and hers it came out that she had Russian DNA. But for whatever reason, I've got all the other Eastern Europeans, but I'm specifically, my DNA test says I'm not Russian, right? But anyways, why am I bringing this up? The day in life. There's something that goes on where even if I think people who have, what am I trying to say here? That even if people don't identify as being communists, or aren't really that caught up in explicitly being like Russian or something, or idealizing Stalin, that I've noticed that my mother has the tendency to look at life in terms of a kind of a Stalinistic, making 5-year plans, right? That's one thing that Joseph Stalin was really famous for, was making 5-year plans. And so there's a certain, based on some of the things going on with me living with my family in my hometown and the cost of living and our economics, that we have a certain 5-year plan to sell the house, basically, right? I mean, but I don't want to who knows whether that goal will be met. But why am I bringing this up? Because there's something about Mars-Uranus where there's a certain kind of, like I said, there's a certain elbow grease of Mars to like do some work or to move things around or to get some stuff done. But there's a certain, when Mars is in Taurus, there's this quality of like Aries having, being the beginning of spring, having this like the push of little plants sprouting and things growing and stuff and like life coming out after winter, right, is associated with Mars. And then Venus is there rules over the Taurus is more to do with like, now that spring has got some momentum, we're going to put up the the hanging the what would we call the we're going to relax a little bit. We're going to like have a picnic. We're not going to work so hard. We're going to drink some like iced tea in the sun. And I think like in Venus in Cancer, because Cancer is sort of like the peak of the summertime, there's a certain kind of Venusian, like just appreciating things, taking it easy, not working too hard, being kind of relaxed. But then Mars is there being kind of like a little bit impatient, a little bit frustrated, feeling like its efforts are maybe are going to waste, like it could be doing more, but it's not. But if you look at Uranus, Richard Tarnas often makes this sort of this association with Uranus as being more appropriately to do with the myth of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods. And Prometheus was always known to be the god of foresight, right? And so there's some kind of thing, and where I'm talking about with Venus in Cancer wants to just chill out, it's got this trine to Neptune, where it's going to just be like, why don't we just catch up on this like Dune 3-hour Dune movie that we haven't seen yet, or watch the Game of Thrones series. Why? I mean, like Mars is all impatient to get some real action happening in terms of making radical shifts and changes in real life. But Venus is like, we've got tons of time. Why don't we just chill out with a glass of iced tea, watch some movies, take our time. It's summer, just enjoy things, right? But Mars is frustrated, wants to change things. But there's all this, there is at least the ability to make with Uranus, with foresight, some kind of plan to work for the future, so that we can at least plan. We have the foresight to see what's coming, the foresight to know what changes we need to make, and that if we try to make all those changes at once, it may be like a monumental earthquake, natural disaster, which we don't, even if you just, if you move a damn bookshelf and it triggers, no, I'm not saying, there may be no causal relation between moving furniture around and causing earthquakes, but there's still this sort of dynamic where the things which are stuck in the same place for a long time, if you try to move too much of it at once, it may shake things up too much with unpredictable, disruptive, chaotic results. And so it's better to at least see the need for change and make a plan to the future, and then act accordingly, right? So there's some other ideas that I had for Mars and Venus and Uranus and all this kind of stuff, but this is basically the gist of it. One of the things, I don't know, I'm only at 18 minutes. This is not a very long video, 18 minutes. I will just get into it, like, there's something that I have noticed as well, where I'm doing these astrology videos, but I have to admit, I'm not doing this for the money right now, and in the past, I have been able to do some natal chart readings in the past, but that hasn't really been going for me these days. And I've been considering, like one of the things I could do is to create a website in which I can sort of advertise, or I can create booking or whatever. But one of the things, like, I think when I first started out doing astrology, that maybe I was a little bit naive or a little bit overly optimistic or idealistic in terms of being able to use astrology as a kind of a viable business, right? And so I don't, based on the whole economic pressure, there is a lot. One of the things I did was that I made a series of videos where I'd taken a break from doing astrology because as I was recovering from some health problems and I really wasn't feeling very confident about it, and then I was trying to um, I was trying to in my mind create a certain system or approach or however I was going to tackle the astrology channel. And one of the things that I decided was basically not to worry about the money, not to worry about making it a viable business, but just to focus on doing the videos. And there's also a lot of other things. Sometimes I haven't really been getting into the philosophy or the in this video, but I was ended up taking a bunch of like arts and philosophy courses from the weird studies people, and that ended up taking me. Well, I don't know. It was just something that didn't have really much to do with what I was trying to do with astrology. It was kind of leading me in another direction, but I needed. It was something. It's something where I had some kind of desire to explore certain things that I hadn't explored, to break free of whatever I was bogged down in, and there's certain, you're just going with what resonates with you, right? Or what you're kind of vibing with. And for me, the most important thing was to have a sort of sense of inspiration or enthusiasm behind what I was doing that would carry me on so that I could keep making videos and not getting dismayed if it wasn't making my goal for being like a viable business. And since the thing is, since I ended up doing that, like I went from having only whatever 50 or 60 subs to now I'm under 300 subs, but I'm at like what 275 or something. So I mean whatever, I've gained at least 200 followers from doing this approach where I'm not worried that much about making money. But this is the whole thing, is that in the long run, if using the sort of gift of foresight or whatever with Mars and Uranus, there is some sort of pressure to change, do something different, and I am, I think it's just best to, I don't know. This is kind of my own personal issue with trying to work out my money making financial situation, but that it helps, I think, to have astrology be something that I can do without feeling this weight that it has to be something that makes a lot of money for me. But it can be something that I'm doing just for the enthusiasm of it, right? However, there's some kind of like underlying tension with Mars Uranus that is like that I was thinking about this in terms of like trying you don't want to be, to use this as an example of why I think it helps for me to be taking the approach of just doing this because I'm in, like, because for one thing, even if I wasn't doing a video channel like this, I would be doing the things that I would do. I would be, and one of those things would be probably, pulling some tarot cards, looking at some astrology charts, and I could either share that with people or not, right? I could be private about it, or I could be public about it. But I think with Mars and Uranus, where there's a certain kind of like impatience or frustration, like one of the things I think it's better to just like avoid being impatient with your audience or being frustrated with your audience or trying to be like being impatient or frustrated with your own with this project that I'm doing as like a business and be and wanting, because it could be like this idea that where you could, with Uranus being the god of foresight, you can see in a sort of 5-year plan into the future that you're going to need to like make some money or something like that. But there's certain like, it's nice to be able to, it's also, Uranus stands for freedom, right? And liberation. And it's nice to be able to just do something without, and being free from that pressure. Although there's this whole kind of time is money thing, and eventually there's going to have to be some sort of way to make money that to offset, just spending all this time on things that don't make money, right? But one of the things that I was thinking of is that like, I don't know. It's just like when you go. I once worked as a salesman, and there's certain things certain things about working retail or sales that I didn't like was that you're there to service the customer, right? And there's certain things where in the job that I used to work, if you would like sign people up for extended warranties, you would get a commission on that. And so, but you're supposed to this is the kind of thing, I think with Venus and Mars and Uranus, for some reason this was coming up anyways, the idea that like, if you're offering a product or a service, it's supposed to be something which is primarily supposed to be helpful for the client, helpful for the customer. But when I have to deal with salesmen, and I can sense that they're trying to like sign me up for something like an extended warranty, and I'm like, I know enough about this that you aren't doing this because you're thinking about me. You want me to do this because you're gonna make an extra bit of money where you're gonna get paid. You have incentive from your own self-interest to sell me on this thing, and so it's when the customer starts to feel like, or the client starts to feel like they're under all this pressure to shell out money to do something which is to help the person selling them, where you're kind of like, yeah, it's kind of funny because it's like there's a Venus-Mars thing going on where with Venus it's all about you're trying to like present it in like, we're so generous, we really want to help you, but like never mind the fact that I'm making money off of this. And where there's a certain rebellious thing where you're like, well, what if I don't want to sign up for the extended warranty? What if I don't want to sign up for your course? What if I don't want to sign up for your this special opportunity, right? Like you're presenting this thing as it's going to be so good for me. But what if this is like, what if you're somebody who's basically just like self-indulgent? You're like, I really have this thing that I like to do, and I'm frustrated that I can't make money off of it, so I'm putting that on you as somebody like to pay all this money. And is like, is this because I'm doing something that's actually that's beneficial, or is it because I'm putting all this pressure on you to somehow validate what I'm doing, and it's my own kind of narcissism, right? And it's not actually doing something, or just to make money, right? Like, what if I don't give a shit about whether your consumer product is going to break and you have extended warranty or not. I give a shit because I'm going to be able to pay the bills easier if you sign up for it. Right? Like, but you have to like have this veneer that you're all like totally genuine about it. But this kind of thing where you're like if you go in to buy something, and like instead of having a friendly interaction with the salesman, you can just be like, nah, I don't think I'll get it. And the guy's just like, like you're trying to be like, so you're trying to be polite with each other, but like you could tell that you're just like pissing each other off. Like, you sure you don't want the extended warranty? Yeah, I think I'm sure. And you're like, that little, like people, like the salesman and the clients are looking like they want to like get in a fight with each other over like this thing that's supposed to, because like there's this false pretense of like how friendly and helpful you're supposed to be when you're kind of like you're just feeling you're under a lot of pressure, right? For something that is basically to just help the other person out, right? And this is the whole thing, is that I do believe, like, I like doing this stuff basically, but I believe in the value of doing things that are actually really honestly helpful, and not just like putting pressure on to try to validate some identity with, I'm identified with the things that I like doing, and I'm either under pressure to validate that by making money, or pressuring other people to pay for it to validate this identity. It's kind of silly, right? And I think there's this other way you can look at it, but there's a certain rebelliousness against the sort of the bullshit factor of that, versus the kind of like this freedom being like, well, I can just make stuff without putting that pressure on people to, and it can just be free of that pressure, right? But then what that does is that offloads the pressure somewhere else, where it's like, well, I'm going to have to figure out a way to solve this problem one way or another, right? And I think, and there's also, before I used to be doing these like support group things, and I had this attitude of just doing everything for free because I wanted to make it accessible for people, or I wanted to, or that maybe, I don't know. I'm probably not going to get into doing the support group thing, but there's some kind of like, there is a necessity. I think this could have more to do with Mercury opposing Pluto. That's another thing. I kind of missed the Mercury opposite Pluto, but Venus is going to oppose Pluto. There's this kind of thing about like being the veneer of being nice and friendly and helpful versus the pressure the pressure to make something work, the pressure to make ends meet, the pressure to balance the books, the pressure to meet the quota for the Stalinistic 5-year plan, all those kinds of things, right? Maybe I shouldn't joke about Joseph Stalin either, right? But there's something about the foresight of Uranus, right, which can be, to we don't have to do this all right now. We don't have to explode into a meltdown of frustration and anxiety. We can sort of offset this by projecting it into the future as something we're going to have to work towards over the years. And there's a certain freedom, I think, in being able to do stuff like this channel and not putting pressure on it to be the money maker, right? But the thing is, I think the other thing too is though that, like, okay, Venus has more, as I think Venus has less to do. Some people make Venus into having a lot to do with money. I think money has more to do with Mercury, because Mercury is all about bartering and deal making and exchanging. But there's this thing about Venus being about desire, what you want, and the motivation of like being motivated by what is sweet rather than sour, right? Being motivated by what is enticing, what is appealing. Whereas there may be other motivations. There could be motivation, like I'm not motivated so much by what is good. I just don't want to be poor. I don't want to be down and out, right? So there's like this kind of like the Mars. There's this kind of like Mars having some elbow grease, having some energy, having some mojo to invest into pushing the Sisyphus boulder up the hill or whatever, right? Versus being attracted to something that you like and seeing that as like, oh, maybe if I work towards this, then I can work for a more appealing. But the Venus is also in this trine to Neptune right now, so the appeal of like what is luring you towards something you may like may just be a kind of delusion, right? It may just be like kind of like a fantasy image that you think you can create, but then when you get to the nitty gritty realistic thing, it's like a splash of cold water in the face, and you're kind of like, oh my god, I was completely deluded. Why did I think that this was going to be a good idea, right? But nonetheless, there's some kind of one other thing too is the value of astrology in terms of futurism, right? And I think that you can use astrology to go all the way back to ancient Greece, and study how the Romans were doing or what the ancient Egyptians were doing, and you can look at the history through historical transits and understand the different historical dynamics. But we are in a kind of a novel situation, right? Because we've gone through so much technological advancement. Again, Uranus has to do with technological breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs, and there's a certain futurism to do with Uranus, right? A futurism of looking forward to what is unfolding in the future and that there are these planetary cycles which may not, I'm not going to call them eternal, because obviously there was a time when our solar system wasn't the same as it was, and if we use a scientific approach, the solar system will probably change. Apparently the moon is moving gradually farther and farther away from the Earth, and at one point in time the moon is just going to like peace out. We're not, but who knows if humanity will even be around at that point in time, right? And so we're here within a certain window of time where we are limited by the length of our human life, and we are in a period of unprecedented technological breakthrough. We are in a period of civilizations changing, transforming, different political pressures, different ecological pressures, and astrology, rather than just me moving, feeling we can feel the mounting pressures at these huge scales that are completely outside of our control, right? But then what is under control? Maybe the only thing that we have under our control is the ability to move some bookshelves around in your own private space, your bedroom, and it feels like you're rearranging furniture on the deck of the Titanic, right? Like, what's the point of this? It makes barely any difference, but there's some kind of like ability to use astrology to predict the future, which people don't want you to do, by the way. Like, there's one thing that people want to market astrology in a way that's more about like relationship compatibility, or like, what kind, I'm not really sure. There's all sorts of different, the point is you can take astrology in all sorts of different directions, but people don't want to acknowledge the importance of future prediction, of where are we headed as a civilization, and can we use astrology to predict the things that are going to happen, and somehow with using the gift of foresight to try to navigate towards a better outcome than otherwise, right? I think it is a gives us an opportunity to have a kind of a mindful contemplation of the dynamics at play, to rather than being alarmist or worked up. And we can also see that there are, rather than acting things out in a violent and aggressive way, we can still find a way to, like the idea that maybe we can give the energy a way to express itself that is less dangerous or less volatile, to create but there still may be the sense that the little changes that we make at a personal level may be insignificant in the grand scheme of things, right? But there's still, it's a way, I think there's something creative about this, right? In the sense that there's some sort of creative pressure, as well as the force of innovation, the force of change, the ability to switch things up, to see that there's certain things that we may feel stuck with in a fixed situation, the way that Taurus is a fixed earth sign. And there, also keep in mind, there's also the stuff about fixed star Algol, which I'm not getting into, because it's apparently one of the worst fixed stars of the zodiac. It has a lot to do with Medusa and the suppression of the feminine in mythology and stuff like this. But and losing one's head and all this kind of stuff. So there's a certain kind of like, you don't want to lose your head in frustration that you can't make all the changes right now, or that the changes you're going to be making are like deck chairs on the Titanic, right? I think it's better to rearrange some deck chairs on the Titanic than to have a complete meltdown, or try to aim for the bigger things that are outside of our reach. But we can still we can still use the astrology as a way to have a view of where we're going in the future, and what needs to be done, and what kind of forces are going to be supporting certain things, or what kind of forces are going to be in resistance, and how to work around that. And the principle too of liberation, right? Like we don't want to get frustrated with anybody. We want to take a certain self responsibility to make the changes that we need to make ourselves, even if they may be, even if it's something like, even if making your bookshelf look different, or your, you know, it may be kind of insignificant and pointless, but it may be working at this really micro level that may have some kind of change reaction that may make a little light bulb go off of inspiration to get the cogs turning, and try to course correct to steer towards a better future for all parties involved. Okay, so I think that's enough. Maybe I've just been rambling, but I'd like to thank you again for tuning in and supporting the channel. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Have a nice summer, everybody, and stay tuned for more.